My sister stood over the sink, holding my insulin like a weapon, smiled and said, "If I can't have diabetes, then neither can you." 9 days later, I watched her cry in front of a judge as they read every single charge out loud. The disposal switch made a small clicking sound when she rested her finger on it. That's what I remember most. Not the row of vials lined up on the counter like a surgical display. Not the way the morning light came through the kitchen window and caught the clear liquid inside them. Not even the smile, though I will never stop seeing that smile. What I remember is the soft mechanical click of her finger finding the switch and the way she looked at me while she did it. Patient, satisfied, like she'd been planning this moment for so long that the actual arrival of it was almost a disappointment. "If I can't have diabetes," Nora said, "then neither can you." My name is Leah. I am 23 years old. I have had type 1 diabetes since I was 9. I've managed it every single day for 14 years. The finger pricks, the pump changes, the 2 a.m. alarms, the mental math that never stops running in the background of every meal, every workout, every ordinary Tuesday. I have never once asked anyone to feel sorry for me for having it. But that morning, standing in our parents' kitchen in Delwood, Ohio, while my sister held every unit of insulin I owned over the garbage disposal, I understood something for the first time. I had spent years managing my disease. I had never once thought I would have to manage my sister. Half the vials were already gone. She had flushed them while I was still asleep. The rest were in her hand. I had maybe 6 hours. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand what the 2 years before it looked like. I was 21 when this started. Nora was 17, almost 18. We grew up in the same house in Delwood, a mid-sized suburb 40 minutes from Columbus. Our parents, David and Carol, are good people, careful people. The kind of parents who researched insulin pumps for 6 months before they let my endocrinologist switch me over at age 12, who kept a laminated emergency protocol on the refrigerator for the first 3 years after my diagnosis, who never once made me feel like a burden, even on the nights I woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. and needed juice and reassurance. They tried to be the same kind of parents to Nora. That was never the problem. The problem was that Nora noticed from a very early age that I required more of them. Not more love, more logistics, more planning, more phone calls to the school nurse, more conversations with restaurant managers, more insurance paperwork, more of their mental bandwidth. She noticed, and she filed it away somewhere she didn't talk about. Not then. When I was 19 and Nora was 15, I had a bad episode. My pump malfunctioned during a family camping trip to Hocking Hills State Park. I spent 2 days in the hospital in Logan, Ohio, while my parents alternated between my bedside and calling my endocrinologist and trying to keep Nora occupied in the waiting room. She was fine, quiet even. She brought me a magazine from the gift shop, a celebrity gossip one I never read, and told me she was glad I was okay. I believed her. Looking back, I can identify a handful of smaller things before the camping trip that I wrote off as ordinary sibling weirdness. She hid my glucose meter once and claimed she hadn't touched it. I found it behind the towels in the linen closet. Another time I reached for my juice boxes, the small apple juice ones I kept in the pantry specifically for hypoglycemic episodes, and 3 of them were missing. My mother assumed we'd just run low and forgotten to restock. We hadn't. Neither of those things felt, in the moment, like the opening moves of something deliberate. I was 19 and focused on managing my own life. I wasn't looking for patterns. Then Nora turned 18. The announcement came at the dinner table on a Tuesday in March of the year she graduated high school. She had done some reading, she said. She had been experiencing symptoms, excessive thirst, fatigue, blurry vision sometimes. She was worried she might have diabetes too. My mother went quiet in the way she does when she's reorganizing her entire internal world. My father said they would make an appointment. I sat across from Nora and tried to read her face. She looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not frightened, not uncertain, expectant. The blood work came back clean. A1C of 5.1, fasting glucose of 84, not pre-diabetic, not borderline, completely textbook normal. Her GP said she was in excellent health and suggested she might be experiencing anxiety, which can mimic some of those symptoms. Nora did not accept this. Over the following 6 months, she transformed. The episode started small, a shakiness at the dinner table, a moment of disorientation at the grocery store, and escalated steadily. She began refusing certain foods, claiming she couldn't regulate her response to them. She asked my mother to start keeping juice boxes in the pantry for her. She told her high school friends she had been recently diagnosed and was still figuring out her management routine. I want to be precise here, because this part matters. There was never a diagnosis. There was never a second positive test. There was never a doctor who confirmed anything she claimed. What there was instead was a performance so committed and so detailed that it worked anyway. Because Nora had watched me for 14 years. She knew exactly what diabetes looked like from the inside. My parents, who had spent over a decade learning to take my medical symptoms seriously, extended the same instinct to Nora. They took her to 3 different specialists over 8 months. They spent, by my rough estimate, somewhere around $4,000 out of pocket between copays, tests, specialist visits, and the continuous glucose monitor she insisted on wearing even though it showed consistent, healthy readings. She told them the device was probably calibrated wrong. I documented it quietly, notes on my phone, dated. Not because I knew where this was going, mostly because something about watching it unfold felt important to record. The birthday party incident was September 12th of that year, my 22nd birthday. My mother had rented rented out the back room at Presto's, a restaurant we'd gone to since I was small, about 30 people, nothing elaborate. Nora arrived 40 minutes late, looking pale and unsteady. 15 minutes into the party, she collapsed against the wall near the dessert table, slid to the floor, and when the paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, someone had called 911 before my parents could react. Her blood sugar was 95. A paramedic, a young guy named Terrence, who I recognized from a previous call to our house, checked the device twice. Then he looked up at Nora with a careful, neutral expression and said everything looked normal. Nora said the meter was broken. She said this while lying on the floor of the restaurant, surrounded by my birthday guests, with 2 paramedics kneeling beside her. She said it calmly, with total conviction, and I watched my mother's face move through 3 different things in about 2 seconds. Relief, confusion, and then a careful, deliberate return to concern. I drove home alone that night. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The escalation came fast after that, the way it does once something has been set in motion. Nora began inserting herself into my medical appointments. She didn't come into the exam room. She came to the waiting room, and she made sure to arrive first. And she made sure to mention to the receptionist that she also had diabetes and was waiting for her sister. She never had a scheduled appointment. She was just there, in the same chairs, in the same orbit. My endocrinologist, Dr. Mira Kapoor, noticed. She was careful about it. During one of my October appointments, she asked, gently, how things were at home. I told her they were fine. I don't know why I said that. Reflex, I think. The same reflex that keeps you from saying the real answer when someone asks how you're doing. In November, Nora started taking insulin. Not her own, mine. I noticed first because my Lantus pen seemed to be running lower than my calculations suggested. I counted my remaining units. They didn't match my injection log. I mentioned it to my mother and she said I was probably just miscounting, that it was easy to lose track. She wasn't dismissing me. She genuinely believed that. I started keeping my medication in a small lockbox in my room after that. The key went on my keychain. That was the planted detail. Remember it. Nora noticed the lockbox. She didn't say anything about it directly, but I caught her once, standing in my doorway when she thought I was asleep, looking at the shelf where it sat. In early December, our cousin Bex came to visit for Thanksgiving. The holiday had been shifted by a week that year because of a conflict with my father's work schedule. Bex is funny and loud and completely unfiltered, which is why what happened worked the way it did. Nora was mid-performance at the dinner table. Shakiness, unfocused eyes. My mother was already moving toward the pantry to get juice. Bex watched for about 30 seconds and then said, in that completely unedited way she has, that she'd been in Nora's room an hour earlier looking for a phone charger and had found, quote, a truly unhinged candy stash, like a pillowcase. Nora went completely still. My Aunt Sophie, who is an ER nurse at Ohio Health Riverside and who had been quietly skeptical for months, stood up, retrieved the glucose meter from the counter, and walked to Nora without asking permission. Nora didn't move. Couldn't, I think. The number that came back was 95. My aunt tested her again 10 minutes later. Still 95. The shaking had stopped the moment Bex mentioned the candy. My father left the table. My mother didn't speak for a long time. Sophie sat back down and ate her sweet potatoes. Bex, to her enormous credit, understood immediately that she had just pulled a thread that was attached to something much larger than a candy stash, and she went quiet too. That night, after Nora went to her room, my parents found her diary. I wasn't there for that part. They told me about it later, in pieces, over several weeks, as they processed what they'd read. It wasn't a confessional document. It wasn't written for anyone to find. It was planning notes. Detailed, methodical, obsessive. Entry after entry cataloging my episodes and how she'd modified them for her own use. Descriptions of the symptoms she'd observed in me, and notes on how to replicate them convincingly. A record of every faked collapse, annotated with what worked and what needed refinement. Over a year of entries. 37 documented episodes. My parents gave her 30 days to find other housing. She screamed, genuinely screamed, that they were choosing their defective child over their healthy one. She used the word defective. My mother told me about it 2 weeks later, and her voice didn't change when she said it, which told me everything about how hard she was working to stay composed. Nora left, or seemed to. What she actually did was wait. Black Friday. My parents left at 5:30 a.m. for an electronics sale at the Best Buy in Columbus. I stayed home. I had changed my pump the night before. A full reservoir, 180 units, 3 days of coverage. I had 4 backup pens in the kitchen drawer, 2 more in my bedroom, and the emergency glucagon kit in the hall closet. I woke up at 7 a.m. to my pump alarming. Empty reservoir. Impossible. I stood in my room and stared at it and ran the numbers twice, and they didn't add up. I went to the kitchen. The drawer was open. The backup pens were gone. I went to the closet. The glucagon was gone. I understood then that she had a key, or had made one, or had never actually left. I walked into the kitchen. She was standing at the sink. Everything was lined up on the counter. The pens, the glucagon, the reservoir cartridges she must have manually drained, and she was holding the vials, the good ones, the fast-acting, the ones that actually kept me functional, all of them together in one hand, her other hand resting on the garbage disposal switch. She told me what she wanted. A recorded confession. Me, on camera, stating that I had coached her, that every episode she'd performed over the past 2 years was something I had taught her, that the whole thing was my invention, my manipulation. If I recorded it and sent it to my parents, she would give back the medication. If I didn't, she would flip flush everything and be gone before anyone came home. I asked her what she thought that would accomplish. She said it would give her a way back. She had thought about this. That part was clear. She had a logic to it. Even if the logic was the logic of someone who had moved so far into their own version of events that they couldn't see the edge anymore. I told her I needed to think. She said I had as long as it took for my blood sugar to make the decision for me. I could already feel it. The thirst coming on fast. That metallic taste in the back of the throat that means things are moving in the wrong direction. My CGM was in my room. Useless without insulin to deliver anyway. But I didn't need it. 14 years of living in this body told me the number was climbing and there was nothing stopping it. She watched me calculate. She smiled. You're sweating, she said. What is that, 400? How long before your organs start shutting down? What she didn't know was that earlier, when she'd been pulling medication from the hall closet, she'd used a syringe to manually empty my reservoir. She'd been careful, but one syringe, the small U100 one, still capped, had rolled under the lip of the cabinet and she hadn't noticed. I had. I'd seen it from the doorway when she'd walked me to the kitchen to show me what she'd done. I didn't look at it directly. I kept my eyes on her face. I waited. 40 minutes into this, our neighbor Mrs. Elaine Fenwick knocked on the front door. Mrs. Fenwick is 71 years old. She has lived across the street from our family since before I was born. She is not a dramatic woman, not a busybody. She came because she'd seen Nora's car, a car that wasn't supposed to be there, in the driveway, and something about it had bothered her enough to cross the street. Nora answered the door, which she had to do because it would have been more suspicious not to. I heard her voice, high, fast, too friendly, saying I was fine. We were just having a family morning. Nothing to worry about. Mrs. Fenwick said she wanted to see me herself. Nora dragged me to the door, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise, which I didn't register until the next day. She was talking the whole time, filling the air with words so there was no room for anything else. I looked at Mrs. Fenwick. Her face was calm, but her eyes were reading mine the way someone reads a face when they know the words aren't going to tell them the truth. I asked her quietly if she still had that herbal tea for nausea. She hated herbal tea. I hated it more. We had had exactly one conversation about it 3 years prior, when she'd offered me some after a bad episode, and I'd told her honestly that I couldn't stand the stuff. She had laughed and said she felt the same way, but kept buying it out of habit. Her face didn't change. She said she'd go get some. Then she looked down at my left pocket, where I always kept my meter clipped, and asked if I'd checked my blood sugar lately. My pocket was empty. No meter. No pump. She understood. She turned and walked back across the street faster than I had ever seen her move. Nora slammed the door. She pulled me back to the kitchen. She was angry now. The calm had broken. And she held the last 4 vials over the disposal and told me that was my last chance, that Mrs. Fenwick wasn't going to figure it out, that old women didn't notice things. I said okay. She thought I was agreeing. I reached into my waistband. The syringe, still capped. I had slid it from under the cabinet while Nora was watching the door, while she was focused on Mrs. Fenwick's retreating back. 2 units. Not enough to correct the high I was already in, but enough to slow what was coming. Enough to buy 30 minutes. I injected through my shirt before she could react. She lunged for my arm. Too late. Then we both heard it. Sirens. Already close. Already turning onto our street. Mrs. Fenwick had not gone to get herbal tea. She had walked to her front door, unlocked it, stepped inside, picked up her phone, and dialed 911 before she even sat down. She told the dispatcher she believed a medical emergency was being prevented from receiving care. She gave our address. She gave her name. She said she had known the family for 23 years and something was very wrong. The paramedics came through the front. 2 officers came through the back door, which Nora had been moving toward. They found me on the kitchen floor. I had gone down somewhere in the preceding minutes. I don't have a clear memory of sitting down, surrounded by broken glass from one of the vials that had shattered when she dropped it. My blood sugar when they tested me was 387. They started an IV in the ambulance. Nora was standing at the back door with her hands raised, not because anyone had told her to raise them, but because she understood what the lights meant. Her phone was on the counter, still recording. She had turned it on when I first walked into the kitchen, intending to capture my confession. Every word she had said was on it. Every threat, the disposal switch, the timeline she had given me, her commentary about organ failure, all of it. 37 minutes of her own documentation, recorded on her own device, sitting on the counter where she'd left it when she went to answer the door. The investigating officer found it 20 minutes later and bagged it. 9 days. 9 days between that morning and the arraignment, during which I was discharged from the hospital, gave my statement twice, had 3 phone calls with the detective assigned to the case, and sat in my parents' living room on a Tuesday night while my father reread the charges sheet and my mother made tea that nobody drank. The courtroom in Franklin County was smaller than I'd expected. Nora came in with a public defender. She had, it turned out, less money than she'd claimed during the 30-day move-out period, less than anyone had known about. She was wearing a gray blazer I didn't recognize. Her hair was pulled back. She looked from a distance like a person who had it together. The prosecutor was a woman named Angela Rourke. She was methodical and unhurried. She read the charges the way you read a list, not performing them, just placing them in the room. Felony reckless endangerment of a person requiring life-sustaining medication, destruction and theft of prescribed medical equipment, deliberate withholding of life-sustaining care. A 4th charge I won't name here because it was still under review at the time. I watched Nora's face. She held it together through the first 2. Her jaw was working. She was pressing her back teeth together, a thing she's done since we were children when she was trying not to cry. lie. By the third charge, her eyes were wet. By the time the prosecutor finished, tears were running down her face in a steady, quiet stream. She turned and looked at me across the room. I didn't look away. I had decided before I came that I was not going to look away. But I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't what I expected. I thought I would feel some version of vindication, some clean, finished feeling. What I felt instead was tired. Not the tired of a bad night, the deep tired of something that had been going on for much longer than the 2 years I'd been aware of it. I looked at my sister's face, and I thought about the magazine she'd brought me in the hospital in Logan, Ohio, the celebrity gossip one. I thought about the fact that she'd walked all the way to the gift shop and picked something out and brought it to me. Whatever came before the manipulation, whatever the original version of Nora was, before the resentment calcified into something unrecognizable, it was somewhere in that magazine. And I was grieving it even while I was watching her cry in front of a judge. The weeks after the arraignment were their own particular kind of complicated. My parents testified at the preliminary hearing. My father is not a man who cries in public, but he came close when he described finding the diary. My mother, who had spent 2 years extending Nora every possible benefit of the doubt, was the one who handed over the journal to the detective. She did it without being asked. She'd kept it after they found it, which turned out to be legally significant in ways the prosecutor's office appreciated. Bex flew back from Portland, where she'd moved the previous spring, to give a recorded statement about the Thanksgiving incident. She called me before she did it and said she was sorry she hadn't put it together sooner. I told her she'd had no reason to. She said that wasn't the point. I understood what she meant. Mrs. Fenwick was interviewed twice. The second time I went with her, at her request, because she said she wasn't sure she was remembering the herbal tea detail correctly, and she wanted to make sure she said it right. I sat in the waiting area while she gave her statement. When she came out, she patted my hand and said, "I knew something was wrong, sweetheart. A person doesn't ask for tea they hate unless something is very wrong." I had to look at the ceiling for a moment after that. Nora's public defender entered a negotiation. I wasn't part of those conversations. The case belonged to the state, but my victim advocate kept me informed. The negotiation took 11 days. The outcome was a plea to 2 of the 4 charges, a suspended sentence on 1, mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment, 2 years of supervised probation, and a no-contact order that covered me, our parents, and Mrs. Fenwick. The no-contact order was Nora's idea, actually. Her attorney relayed it to the prosecutor's office. She requested it herself. I've thought about that a lot. There's a financial piece that I'm still dealing with. My parents' insurance didn't cover the emergency hospitalization in full, and the destroyed medication had a replacement cost of around $2,300 that the insurance company classified as a property loss rather than a medical expense, which put it in a different coverage category. My parents covered most of it. I'm paying them back in installments. It's not the most important part of what happened, but it's real, and it's ongoing, and I think it matters to say so. The phone recording, her phone, ended up being the most significant piece of evidence. Her attorney tried to argue it had been obtained improperly, but the device was in plain sight in a location where law enforcement had lawful access during a medical emergency call, and the motion was denied. I listened to the 37 minutes once at the detective's office with headphones. I didn't listen to it again. During that one listen, at minute 22, just before the sound of the siren starts, she said something I hadn't heard in the kitchen. She must have turned away from me when she said it to the room, or to herself, or to nothing. Her voice dropped and she said very quietly, "I just wanted them to look at me the way they look at you." I sat with that for a long time afterward. I'm still sitting with it. Right before they put the handcuffs on her in the courtroom, in that narrow window between the judge's words and the bailiff's hands, Nora turned and found me across the room. She mouthed something, not out loud, not for the lawyers or the observers, just for me. I know what she said. I'm not going to write it here. And not because I'm protecting her. I'm not interested in protecting her. I'm choosing not to write it because it belongs to me in a way that this story, once it leaves my hands, won't. Some things stay inside the family, even when the family is broken, even when the word family has been complicated almost past its usefulness. That's where I am now. I'm 23. I live 40 minutes from Delwood, in an apartment I share with a roommate named Carrie, who knew about my diabetes before she agreed to move in, and who has, without being asked, learned what the glucagon kit is for. My CGM talks to my phone, and my phone is always charged. My medication is organized and accounted for. I have a lockbox, a different one now, nicer, and the key is on my keychain. I still see Dr. Kapoor every 3 months. At my appointment in February, she asked how things were at home. I told her the truth this time. My parents are doing the slow, uneven work of figuring out what the past 2 years mean to them and to each other. Some weeks they are fine. Some weeks my mother calls me at 11 p.m. and we talk for an hour about nothing in particular. I think what she needs on those calls is to hear my voice and confirm that I'm steady. I try to be steady. Most nights I am. The title of this post is the thing Nora said to me in the kitchen. If I can't have diabetes, then neither can you. I've said it to myself probably 100 times since that morning, turning it over, trying to understand the architecture of it, what it reveals about how she saw my disease, not as something I endured, but as something I possessed, something that gave me an advantage she couldn't access, that she resented me for having it, and resented me for not having it badly enough, and resented me for surviving it, and resented me for the love that came with being survived for. There is no version of any of that that makes sense. I know that. But I also know that she brought me a magazine in a hospital in Logan, Ohio, when she was 15 years years old and I was scared, and that the person who did that and the person who stood at that sink are the same person, and I have not figured out how to hold both of those things at the same time. Maybe I don't have to. What I know is this: I am alive. I am managing. The metallic taste is gone. My numbers are good. The lockbox is on the shelf where I can see it from my bed, and the key is in my pocket. And tomorrow I will do what I have done for 14 years. Wake up, check my blood sugar, adjust, continue. That is enough. For now, it is more than enough.